Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Krish, and I'm what you call an aquarist. So I work here at the Two Oceans Aquarium. But before I started working here, I used to work in the genetics lab. But just like you guys, I studied zoology, I studied botany, and I studied water sciences. And all of those things have come together to help me do my job here at the aquarium. So today, I'm going to give you guys a crash course in jellyfish. And so I'll show you the little polyps that actually make jellyfish, and we'll actually unpack it from there and actually show you some real jellyfish. And we'll also unpack the two classes, cube medusa and skyphil medusa, which we currently have in the exhibit at the aquarium. And there's another animal that I will also show you called a ctenophore, which is not a jellyfish, but looks very similar to a jellyfish. And I can also highlight some characteristics from that animal that jellyfish have, but that animal actually does not. Okay, so let's start. So your lecturer told me that you guys have touched on jellyfish and some invertebrates in the past. So just like other invertebrates, jellyfish do not have bones and they do not have a spine, but they do have some sort of network of nerves in their body, which they relay pulses through. And those nerves are also connected to receptors that help them determine night and day. They've got little sensors along the bell of the jellyfish that actually assist them in telling them if it's night or day, if there's a right way up or the right way down when they're swimming. There are groups of jellies that are way more advanced. Those are the box jellyfish or the cube medusa. Think of the word cube. It's also another word for box. So the box jellyfish are way more advanced in that group. The reason why we say that is they actually have eyes that have little retinas that can look around. They've got multiple eyes and they can see in all directions. So they have 360-degree vision. And even though they do not have so-called brains, they actually can hunt for food. If they see a school of fish swimming, they can actually turn around and swim and chase a school of fish in order to hunt them. So jellyfish do definitely hunt. And also, we also do know as well that even though jellyfish don't have brains, they also sleep, because sleeping helps us repair our bodies. And so in the same manner, jellyfish can also repair their bodies when they sleep. So jellyfish come from these smaller animals called polyps. They're tiny anemones. About 2 of them can fit in the tip of your pencil. And if you think of a jellyfish, we can literally think of a plastic bag. I was thinking of a plastic bag now, but I can use a glove as an example. So to work with jellyfish, you always have gloves around. This is a glove. And you can see, don't imagine that these are the tentacles, but this is the glove. And so you can imagine the tentacles of the polyp or the anemone would be at the top of the glove. And so jellyfish have one opening where food goes in, and they also have one opening where food goes out. They do have 2 layers called the mesoglea. That give them 2 layers, but in essence, they are just basically a bag-like body. So they have their mouth, which is also their anus. You can think of their mouth and anus as the manus. And so when the polyp is the shape and it's in the bottom of a rock somewhere, it basically just catches food and it clones itself. But when this polyp turns into a jellyfish, that's when it turns the other way around and basically swims around. So it's the same body plan. One is just stuck to the floor and the other one is able to swim freely, which is the medusa stage in the jellyfish. And I just have a picture here to show you guys. This is a small introduction so that you guys know exactly. I'm just going to move this here, Marit, if that's okay. Is the light okay? So this is exactly what I was talking about before. So the little bag body and the tentacles. So the tentacles have the nematocysts or the stinging cells in them. And that what groups all the jellyfish and the corals together is this cell called a nidum or nematocyst. And that cell has a small little harpoon that stings food. And most of the time, jellyfish venom is potassium-based. So they're very, very good at shocking or short-circuiting their prey and being able to immobilize them and catch them. When the jellyfish undergo stress or the temperature changes during seasons, they form the strawberry. You can see this is a very smooth shape. This is a very rough shape, and we will see some baby jellyfish being born in a few minutes. And so that's when the polyp starts giving us these baby jellyfish that look like little discs or snowflakes. And that's when you get the adult medusa. And from this stage to this stage, that is about 3 weeks. So they grow extremely fast. Jellyfish have the perfect diet body, I'd like to say. The more you feed them, the faster they grow. And the less you feed them, they shrink down again. And remember, I told you guys that polyps can fit in the tip of your pencil. Even though they're that small, they can make some of the longest animals in the ocean. So we know that the longest mammal in the ocean is the blue whale at about 29 meters long. Whereas jellyfish, if it's a blue bottle jellyfish, it can be about 35 meters long. And if it's a lion's mane jellyfish, it can be about 45 meters long. So that totally eclipses the size of a blue whale. And just so you guys can see, this is a 1 rand coin. And all of these things that look like sand grains are actually little polyps. And these little polyps are actually the animals that make those long animals with all those tentacles behind them in about 2 months' time. So instead of a blue whale taking years and years and years to reach that size, because jellyfish are invertebrates and they don't necessarily have bones restricting their growth and slowing it down, because they're basically made out of collagen and water, they can put on growth very quickly and they can grow much longer lengths because they don't actually need to support their bodies, as well as being in the water helps their bodies being supported much better. I'm just going to put this down. Okay, so in here, we've got polyps. So polyps like living in the mucky floor. I don't know if you guys can see them over here. They are very tiny. And if we can focus, I don't know how well we can focus, you can see some of them are becoming brown. Those are the ones that are starting to give us baby jellyfish. So the ones that have brown tips on the end of them, those ones you can see if we focus on them long enough, they'll start pulsing and moving. And as they contract and restrict like that, they actually break themselves free from the polyp that sits out at the bottom of the muddy seafloor or on the rocks. And so then the current will carry them away further. That is very, very important because polyps are actually clones of one another. So I'm just going to get something to point with while Mareti is showing you guys that. You just get some forceps. So if we look at these polyps over here, okay, they can technically be clones of one another. They can all be brothers or all be sisters of one another, because if you look at this polyp, it basically just split into two. So it used to be one, then it split into two. Some polyps can form little roots and pop up a new polyp. And so we consider polyps to be immortal because they are literally genetic clones of one another. And so if one individual dies, genetically, there's still another individual alive somewhere, okay? Additionally, these polyps can also form a scar, just like you have a scar when you get injured. And those scars can stay dormant for about 20 years. And when the conditions come back or come right again, these polyps pop up again and just clone themselves. So in theory, that same jellyfish has been around for an extended period of time. These polyps also work exactly like a fruit tree. As long as I've got this species of polyp, I've got this species of jellyfish. Just like you having a fruit tree in your backyard, whether it be a naartjie tree, an apple tree, an apple tree. As long as you have the apple tree, you have apples, basically. So as long as I've got this polyp, I will have that species of jellyfish. We also do get jellyfish, however, that can turn back into polyps. So like an adult turning back into a baby, when these jellyfish get damaged, they basically turn back into these tiny little polyps and just clone themselves and live their lives until the conditions are right again for them to turn into jellyfish. Yeah, we can move away, Mare. So before we get back to how we grow jellyfish, and I'm going to show you some jellyfish just now, I just wanted to show you some plankton. So plankton at the aquarium, we grow two kinds of zooplankton, or three kinds of zooplankton for jellies to eat. We grow mysid shrimp. We grow artemia shrimp, which we buy eggs and we hatch them to feed our jellyfish. And we also grow rotifers as well. They're the smallest plankton we actually feed our jellies. And we'll look at them just now. They're completely tiny. They're basically like dust in this tank over here. And it's very important that we look at this. The reason why this tube is green is because we also grow a lot of algae, okay? And so algae occurs naturally in the ocean. And when the sun shines, the algae actually grows. And the organisms in the copepods and other invertebrates eat this algae, okay? Instead of this nutrients being lost to the ocean, jellyfish will then come along and also eat the same things. And when the jellyfish die in a few months' time, whether it be 4 months or 6 months' time, the jellyfish actually return that carbon back to the bottom of the ocean. And in a few months or years' time, when there's a storm again or upwelling, that nutrient is pulled back into the surface as compost for these algae to use. And so the carbon that the jellyfish actually took out of the top layer of the ocean is then taken to the bottom of the ocean and recycled back up again. So jellies are exceptionally good at closing the carbon cycle in the ocean, whereas lots of fish, once they actually eat these organisms, actually get removed from the ocean. And so that amount of carbon is actually lost from the ocean itself. And it's not actually really returned directly back to the ocean, just like with jellies. So as an example, we've got some artemia here. I'm just going to remove the air stone and I'm going to put my phone on flashlight so you guys can see. These little shrimp come towards the light. That's one of the indicators. And I don't know if we can see them nicely now. No, let's try. Oh, let me do this. Can you see that, Maria? So that's how small they are. And so this is some of the plankton we actually grow in order to feed the jellyfish. The jellyfish eat about 8 to 10 times a day. They'll get 3 of these feeds a day, about 2 liters of that. And then they will get 2 feeds of these little shrimp over here. We call them mysid shrimp. They're very popular and they're very high in protein. They're cannibalistic. Grow them in a special tank called the chrysal, which Marit will show you now. So basically, the tank's flow does this, and it basically keeps the zooplankton in suspension. So it's a zooplankton chrysal. So our animals never really touch the bottom of the tank, and that also allows us to keep our jellyfish as well. These are moon jellyfish. You can see how they're swimming and how they're falling. And the 4 shapes in the head, those are their stomachs are as well as their gonads. And then at the back, that looks like the ribbons or tails, those are actually the lips. And you can see on the edge of them, there are tentacles that they will pulse their food. So we're just going to feed some jellyfish quickly. And then when we come back, we will probably see how they are eaten. So these are some pretty mouth jellyfish babies. We're just going to pour some food in for them. And I'll feed the baby moon jellyfish. And then hopefully when we come back in a few minutes, we'll see the food in them, just to show you how efficient they are at catching their prey, even though they don't really have hands to catch them, so to say. Okay, so let's get to our jellyfish. So South Africa has the highest diversity of jellyfish in the world. Our coastline is about 2,300 kilometers squared. And when we think of true jellyfish, Skyper medusa, we have about 26, 28 species that are endemic that are only found here. They're in the class of Hydromedusa, we have not unpacked how many species we have there yet. And in the class of Cubomedusa, we've only described 2 species out of the 8 that we kind of know. There might be more that kind of know does truly occur on our coastline. So once again, I'll show this to the light so that it can show you guys much better. I'll lift it up for you. Is that okay? Can they see them clearly? So these are little baby moon jellyfish. They are about a week old and they grow exceptionally fast. If I put my finger next to it for the scale, you can really see how tiny they are. Okay, and we're constantly growing new jellyfish because jellyfish themselves have a very, very short lifespan. They live about 9 months, or 6 months, or 3 months, depending on the kind of jellyfish. So just like somebody buying flowers for you when you're at home and having to replace them constantly, we're constantly having to grow new jellyfish to replace the ones we put on exhibit, we show to the public. The jellyfish that do expire or die, we feed to other jellyfish that eat jellyfish. We feed it to the turtles upstairs in our rehab, basically. This is a very interesting jellyfish called a Malaysian jellyfish, or Amakusa. They have recently started invading our waters. But what's really nice about these jellies are, even though they got a really bad sting, and even though they can multiply really quickly when the water gets warm, they can't ever live in a swarm. They actually get entangled in each other. And they get stuck on each other and they cause their own demise. Even now you can see how they're sticking to each other at the bottom if we don't keep them flowing around. So they actually sort out their own population. Lots of people think that animals like turtles and sunfish can control jellyfish populations. But you have to remember that turtles and sunfish are never available in vast enough numbers to even have an impact on jellyfish. We do know that animals like penguins in the Arctic waters love eating jellyfish, especially the gonads, like I showed you in the moon jellyfish where the horseshoe shape is, because that's basically the most nutritious part of the jellyfish. So lots of animals preying on jellyfish, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those jellyfish are eaten, that they are no longer there. When jellyfish are stressed, when jellyfish are together in high swarms, they actually give off sperm and eggs and slime. And that actually helps in assisting to even make more baby jellyfish for the future. There's one jellyfish species called the nightlight jellyfish or mauve stinger that completely skips the stage of having the little polyp. Okay, it doesn't have the polyp at all. Every 5 days, whatever sperm and eggs it releases into the water as the currents drift them along, they actually make brand new jellyfish to continue growing the swarm as they go up or down the coastline. So they're basically like a locust swarm, but in the ocean. And I've got a really good picture taken with a friend of mine, Helen, where you can see, even though a jellyfish is small, they don't really worry the size of their prey. This is a nightlight jellyfish eating a small fish. And so you can see the fish is much bigger, but in a few hours' time, the prey will be entirely consumed. Over here, we've got one of the 3 compass jellies on our coast. And so we have a very interesting relationship with compass jellyfish. So they are quite pink and pale, and the little white bits you see floating around with them, that's actually other jellyfish that we fed them. So these are cannibalistic jellies. They definitely eat other jellyfish. And I'll show you quickly how they look when they're older. So they're a very pretty purple jellyfish. And we normally see them wash up very often. It was very important for us to study compass jellyfish, because in the 1970s, before fisheries quotas were really put into place, there was overfishing, especially in Namibia on our west coast. And Namibia is an area that has a lot of fish because they have a lot of what we call upwelling. Upwelling happens when there's wind that flows vertical to the coastline and it sucks up all that gunky nutrients that I explained to you earlier that the jellies store as carbon at the bottom of the sea floor. And so that allows it to be lots of zooplankton and lots of food for fish to eat. So Namibia would support very high fisheries for horse mackerel and for sardines and for pilchards and for snook and other fish like that. But after the 1970s, people removed so much fish from the ecosystem that there weren't enough fish for what we call recruitment, which are older fish able to produce new generations of fish. But interestingly enough, jellyfish eat the same things that the fish do. So even though the fish were removed, the food was still in the water column. And so the jellyfish started consuming that food and they started multiplying even more. So right now in the Northern Benguela, for about every 3.8 million tons of finfish, that's hake, sardines, pilchards, mackerel, there's about 30.8 million tons of jellyfish all year round. In South Africa, we have the same species of jellyfish, but we have fisheries quotas in place. So our jellyfish only appear seasonally in summer and in winter because it's a healthy and natural ecosystem. Whereas in Namibia, because it's out of balance, those jellyfish stay in that ecosystem and they keep a negative pressure on that ecosystem because those jellyfish actually eat the fish and the fish's babies and the fish's eggs, as well as the fish's food. So the fish can't really recover and bounce back because those jellyfish are around all the time. And so we've been trying to study these jellies since about 1996. We were never able to grow them. I started training to study jellyfish in about 2012. So I studied at the University of the Western Cape under Professor Mark Gibbons. Professor Mark Gibbons loves zooplankton and he loves jellyfish. And so in the beginning, I was just supposed to study the polyps, but as things went, we were hit by load shedding a lot. And we never had generators in the building. And so the lab that was temperature controlled at 14 degrees Celsius had the spike in temperature over and over when the power would come on and when the power would come off. Go off again. And eventually, we actually, by accident, got these little polyps to grow into jellyfish, which we tried to do since 1996 using methods that other aquariums use, keeping animals at a stable temperature and then growing them at the exact temperature for the entire lifetime. But our animals do actually not require that because we have a warm current on our east coast and a cold current on our west coast. And with these currents feeding back and forth, warm and cold, was actually the key to growing our species. And so even in the lab, when they grow them today, we actually grow them at room temperature, and we change their water, we drop their temperature so that that shock of warm and cold actually stimulates our species to grow bigger and faster. Okay, so in the group of Skyphor Medusa, this is a very good example. These are Amakusa jellies once again. When they come up with the current, these guys are only about, I think, 4 weeks old. You can see they definitely have a brow umbrella, and they've got these long tentacles in the middle. So they look like an umbrella. So that's how you know it's a true Skyphor Medusa. They also usually have tentacles around them, but Skyphor Medusa shapes can be very, very different. Okay. What we're always looking for is the fact that they've got oral arms or lips in the middle of them. If they don't have lips, then they are not Skyphor Medusa. We can go to the right-hand side here, where we can show another group in the Skyphor Medusa called the frilly mouth jellies. You can see that they are very round shape, and you can see they're starting to have orange in their heads. That's the food we just fed them. You can see how quickly they actually go about eating and removing that plankton. And interestingly enough, when jellies are available in very large swarms of millions and millions of jellies, they're actually the animals estimated to mix the oceans the most with their pulsing. They also have the most efficient pulse, so they don't actually waste or lose a lot of energy when they pulse with how they retract. And every pulse actually, if it doesn't sting the food, delivers the food to their lips, so they can rub it into their central mouth where digestion can start. If a jellyfish eats fish, because they can't digest calcium carbonate, they basically just spit out the bones or the shells that they can't digest, but the rest of the animal is basically just sucked down to a smoothie. We're going to go back to the moon jellyfish on this side. Also a completely different shape. And you can see they are still Skyphor Medusa. They still have those 4 characteristic lips in the center of them. Those are just the easiest ways to identify when something is a Skyphor Medusa or not. There are more intense features, but that's for people that want to be jellyfish scientists one day. Okay. We're going to move over to the Cuban Medusa right now. So the Cuban Medusa or the box jellyfish has the same body plan. You can actually see there's 4 shrimp in its head at the moment. And you can see this box jellyfish is actually box shaped. Okay. And box jellyfish all have this little knee. So once they sting the food on their tentacles, they actually pull the knee in and pull them into the head because their 4 lips is actually in the inside. We can't see clearly now with the footage, but in the inside, they actually have their head. So they actually use their knee to bring their tentacle towards where their lips are so they can deposit the food into their 4 stomachs over here. And so these box jellies are very common in Cape Town. We call them the Cape box jellyfish. Their sting isn't really deadly, but it's as bad as a wasp sting. So it burns a lot and it stings a lot. We also do have people that don't feel the sting the initial day, but will start feeling the sting up to 12 hours or later, where they start feeling pain, but nobody has died of any stings from our box jellyfish on our coast yet. We also have the largest box jellyfish in the world called Chirodropus gorilla. And so that jellyfish is the size of a pick and pay shopping bag. It's quite a big animal. There's also a very interesting animal that we do not have at the moment that I would have loved to show you, but if you want to go read up on them, it's called the crystal jellyfish. It looks very similar to a moon jellyfish. And crystal jellyfish are important because they actually gave us something called the green fluorescent protein, or GFP. And green fluorescent protein is the protein that is used in a lot of cancer research to show where cancer is actually situated. So they will implant this gene into cancer cells, and the cancer cells are actually fluorescent in the blue light. So then surgeons know exactly where to cut out, basically. If they need to find out which mice carry a recessive gene when they do genetics, instead of doing PCRs on all the mice, they can basically just implant the gene that they want to look for with that GFP protein. And when they shine the light on that mouse, the mouse will basically be glow in the dark. Every glow in the dark little fish you can buy at a pet shop has green fluorescent protein in it. And quite interestingly, recently, and you guys love reading journals, somebody actually took green fluorescent protein and planted it into women in order to see how the XY chromosome expresses itself, or the XX chromosome expresses itself in females versus the XY chromosome in males. And it actually looked like when it fluoresces on women, it looks like women have tiger stripes on their bodies, which is very, very interesting. So ladies have a permanent catsuit on, so to say. Over here, this is an animal called a ctenophore, and I'm going to try and make the light shine so that it makes pretty lights for us, but it actually doesn't make lights at all. It refracts light because it has these paddles on its body. Are you seeing anything? No. Should we try and go to that light for a few seconds? I'm sorry for anybody that's sensitive to flickering. The kind of lights that we have in the lab to grow jellyfish are really intense. See any flickering or shivering happening? No, not at all. But they've got these little pedals. If you have some time, just go YouTube, some ctenophores or some comb jellies, and you'll see how they make little, I saw it now. They make these little disco lights on the outside of their bodies. And so that's basically, they don't have stinging cells called nematocysts like jellyfish do. They've got sticking cells. So they actually stick to their food like Velcro. They also have a mouth and an anus, and they've got these 5 ribs along their body. So they are not jellyfish at all, but they are a gelatinous zooplankton. So they are a jelly-like animal that lives in the ocean. Because they don't have nematocysts as stinging cells, they're not cnidarians. And because their body plan is not like a sac-like body plan, it actually has a mouth and an anus. It's also not a jellyfish. So these characteristics help us identify and separate jellyfish from each other. We have another really cool animal that we have babies of that I can show you quickly. They call them the upside down jellyfish. They're basically the corals of the jellyfish. So they can still swim around, and they only swim around when they want to find a better spot to suntan. So just like corals, they've got symbiotic zooxanthellae living in the tissues that create sugars for them. And so they live in mangrove forests, so they can actually live in lower salinity. And actually, depending on how salty the water is, they actually change the color. They can be brown, they can be red, they can be maroon, they can be blue. So they're very, very interesting little animals. And they normally live in the muddy sediment on the sea floor. Okay, just moving back again. There we go. Let's see. Okay, so if I just give you guys a crash course on how we grow jellyfish. So we have lots of these pipettes. I know, I'm sure you guys have these pipettes. We're cut into different sizes. And so we've got a board here, and all the jellies are color-coded. So these are the main species that we grow. Sometimes we grow different species. Frilly-mouthed jellyfish are fairly new. We only started growing them during lockdown. What's really interesting, we collected the eggs and sperm from a jellyfish that washed up on the shore. So even though jellyfish lives on the beach, you can still use them in order to close their life cycle. Moon jellyfish, we have about 4 different kinds of moon jellyfish at the aquarium. They're all very different. So when you come and visit us, you can actually try and spot the difference in the tank to see which ones are different from one another. Some of them actually have frills in them that looks like a doily that somebody stitched in them. Some of them have lips that hang from them. Some of them have their lips flush and flat against their head. They're all very different. But what's quite interesting is with our genetics, we thought that we have one species of moon jellyfish called Aurelia aurita. That's the scientific name throughout the world. We now know that we have between 40 and 50 different kinds of moon jellyfish. And they're so cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan is just the word we use to express how very well distributed the animal is around the world or globally. And so moon jellyfish are so cosmopolitan that they're found in every ocean in the world. And they're so abundant in species that now we just refer to them as Aurelia species 1, Aurelia species 2, Aurelia species 3. Nobody really has time to give all of them new names because there's so many of them. The Cape Compass jellyfish is the jellyfish I showed you over here. We grow them once a year because they live about 6 months. They're restricted to our warmer waters. So you can find them from Cape Town, Mossel Bay, PE, all the way up to Durban. And then around Cape Town, when it's quite warm, especially in the area we have here called False Bay, which is a very large basin that traps a lot of warm water. We have the Benguela campus jelly. This is a jellyfish that occurs from Southern Africa all the way up to Namibia. Before we actually grew them in captivity, we thought they were all different species because they physically change color as they grow. I don't have an example for you now, but they are first white, and then they are pink and white, then they become pink, and then they finally red when they grow out. So they look completely different. And then the Amakusa and the Absalon jellyfish I also explained to you. We do have a different system for growing different species of jellyfish. So when we are not here, the aquarists can just follow the basic instructions for whether a beaker has a number 1 on it or a number 2. A number 1 means we change the jellyfish's water entirely, catch them individually and put them back. And you can imagine if we've got 500 or 800 or 1,000 baby jellyfish to grow at a time, it takes a lot of time to catch baby jellyfish, especially when they are fragile. Then, if the animal is a number 2 jellyfish, that means they sleep in the same water that they slept in the night before. We change the water about weekly, okay? But all the other times, they stay in the same water. That's because the jellyfish, because it's supposed to be water, is actually dependent on the current that they float around with in the ocean. And so if that water changes too drastically, they actually disintegrate because jellies are mostly water. So sometimes you think of a full tank of jellyfish, and the next day you come and you basically have nothing left because those jellyfish will just basically go back to the water that they're mostly named after. In this tank over here, we have some expired jellyfish. You can see that jellyfish is basically doing a hula hooping shape. It's not pulsing correctly like it's supposed to. And so that jellyfish is basically used to feed other jellyfish. It's not sick or anything. It's at the end of its life. So what happens is just like when they get older, the pulsing nerves and things like that start deteriorating and they don't fire as correctly. So they either fire in that hula hoop way, or if you open an umbrella on a very, very windy day and the umbrella inverts, jellyfish also tend to do that. They invert and go the complete opposite way. So if a jellyfish does invert when it's young and it inverts because the water is warm, we can't bring them back because basically the proteins in the bowels have been natured, they've changed shape. So that jelly is basically dead. But if the jellyfish did invert because the temperature got too cold, there's a 50% chance that we can bring them back because most of the time the enzymes or the proteins just became inactive. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. Hope you guys learned a lot. And if I've missed anything, I'm here. There's also questions afterwards, and you guys are welcome to send me an email. Thank you for your time.
Can you zoom the camera?
Hi, okay, so my name is Elizabeth. I have a question about the freshwater jellyfish in South Africa. I was wondering how many native species we have in South Africa.
So that's very, very interesting. So we've got 2 main versions of freshwater jellyfish in Africa. We have 1 species of a hydromedusa that I don't have anymore, but I should have in 2 weeks' time because they come from a hydroid instead of a polyp. And so that is a freshwater jellyfish that's found all around the world, okay? I can see if I can find a video for you just to show you an example. Give me 2 seconds. And so those ones are the same species all around the world. They're generally from China. And so they're the same species all around the world. However, in South Africa, for every river up the East Coast, whether it be the Breede River, the Keurboons River, those rivers, we actually have jellies that we refer to as blue jellies or blubber jellies, okay? Those are jellies that actually live in our rivers up our coast. And they go all the way up the river and they can live in salt water as well. What's been very interesting is that all the freshwater jellies that we've looked at up the river, even though they said that they're the same kind of jelly, they look like they're all separate species. So somebody is still busy looking at that and actually studying that. We also know that those are the longest lived jellyfish that we know of all around the world because we have collected some in 2016. They were fairly large, we don't know how old they were, but they're still alive at the aquarium today. So the longest living jellies in captivity. So I've got a picture, I've got a video of these guys. These are freshwater jellyfish. You can see how they look. Those are hydromedusa. They're quite similar. I can find another one. So they're very translucent. So that's the same species that's found in China. And I can see if I can find a picture of the blubber or blue jellies for you. Just give me a minute. Jellies. Nope. I've got so many jellyfish pictures. It's like somebody having pictures of their dog. So just give me a second to track them down. I can show you what they look similar to. Here we go. That's one. So they come in white, they come in brown. So just look for something that looks like a missile, and they need to have 8 of these lips or outer arms, and they must look very fluffy. Then you're on the right track. They might not be the exact same species, but if they're occurring in a river, they will be a blubber jelly. And the scientific name you're looking for is Catostylus. So Catostylus. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And then Sasha, you mentioned they normally occur in rivers. So we've found some in a dam. They look like we found them on the edge of the dam, and they're really, really small.
What did they look like? Did they look like the first video that I showed you?
Yes, yeah, they're very small and they're basically translucent.
So those, because they're hydromedusa instead of scyphomedusa, their life cycle is not generally dependent on temperature. It's dependent on pH and it's dependent on time of day. So when the day gets longer or the day gets shorter with season changes, you'll start seeing those jellyfish appearing in that dam.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Krish, there's another question from a student.
Go ahead.
Hello, I am Puling.
Hi there.
I caught interest on the gelatinous jellyfish-looking organism.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say they produce any toxin also?
No, so they don't actually produce any toxins that we know of. We don't know a lot about them. So generally what happens is when you study jellyfish, you keep them in a solution of either formalin or ethanol in order to keep the animals so you can either do genetics of it. Okay. And so when we try and put these ctenophores or these comb jellies in that solution, they actually break down in a few months' time. So we actually have to use special chemicals with RNase later. There's also a student that's working on a special solution to keep them as much cheaper. Because then RNase later for a 500 ml bottle costs like 5,000 rand. And imagine if you need at least a sample of 20 jellyfish to look at, and you have to use RNase later. It's not going to be very cheap to look at. So we actually don't know a lot about our ctenophores on our coastline. Professor Mark Gibbons and some other authors have tried to speculate with some samples that we have collected so far. But even this week in Cape Town, if you guys want to look, there was a dive competition happening in Cape Town, a photography competition. And this week, they took so many incredible pictures of jellyfish that I've never seen in my life, especially comb jelly species that I've never seen in my life. And so that's also what's really cool about jellyfish scientists is that you will see one species of jellyfish in abundance for a year or maybe for 2 years, and then afterwards they disappear completely. You never see them again. They're very opportunistic to work on. And so whenever we can try and find species, we try and bring them into the lab. It's also really difficult because most of the jellies that swim around with each other are either boy jellyfish or girl jellyfish because they're clones of one another. So when we bring them to the lab, we need to have a male and a female. And most of the time, a swarm can be made of mostly males and mostly females. So we can't even necessarily study them again. There was one jellyfish we're also trying to work on called the pink meanie. We've only gotten to see it like twice or thrice, and they vanished. There's a similar species in the Mediterranean that went away for 70 years. Nobody saw them. So jellyfish science is very, very interesting, but it's also extremely difficult to work on. I have started trying to do certain sets of research on jellies since 2012, and I still don't have answers because I don't have the same animals to repeat experiments or observations on. So if you want to start working on your honors and your masters maybe, there are lots of people collecting samples right now. So you can always work with Professor Gibbons and get the samples collected and try describing species from that. So you know as much as I do for now about ctenophores. We know a lot about ctenophores because of aquariums like Monterey Bay Aquarium. That's recently actually put a very cool deep sea species of ctenophore exhibit called the bloody belly comb jelly. This is a very, very cool animal. So you can go to Monterey Bay's Instagram page and see that. And so we know a little about them. We know that they eat fish eggs and they reproduce a lot. We know that they eat each other, but we don't know if any of them are toxic or not. But they have a very, very pretty light show. We do put them on exhibit every summer. We have a whole tank of them, hundreds and hundreds of them. And you can go to the Two Oceans Aquarium page. They have tagged me in some of the videos that I posted. And so you can see how pretty the light show is. It's very mesmerizing. I always say that jellies are the most beautiful animals in the aquarium and everything else is cute. So you guys should definitely come and see them here. Sorry, that was a very long answer, but I hope it answered your question.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Please. Krish, can I ask? Oh, sorry. There's another question from a student before I ask my question.
Cool, no problem. Go ahead. Hi there.
Hello.
Hi.
You're speaking to Zanele.
Hi
Oh yeah,
there.
so I was asking why, like, some species that you showed us have an anus and a mouth at the same place, but then another one has a different place of the mouth, and yeah, so how is that possible?
So
Or does it
the
just
ones that I
depend?
showed you, when they are true jellyfish, their mouth and their anus serve the same function. There's just one opening. So just like an anemone, where food can just enter in the one hole and food can exit in the other hole, those are true cnidarians. Those are true jellyfish. The animal that I showed you that does have a mouth and an anus, which is this jelly-like animal. This is not a jellyfish, but is the ctenophore. And so ctenophores, are doing it. Yay. So ctenophores are not jellyfish. They are actually a different group completely. And they actually have these rib-like structures in them. They have a mouth and they have an anus. They've got no cnidones or nematocysts, which are the stinging cells, which is a defining characteristic of what something is a jellyfish is, basically. So this is not a jellyfish. This is just a gelatinous zooplankton. So any animal, whether it be a salp or whether it be a ctenophore, even though their body is jelly-like and they're drifting in the ocean, they are called the zooplankton, and we refer to them as a gelatinous zooplankton, but they are not necessarily what we refer to as a jellyfish. I just wanted to show you guys how confusing the groups are, but those are some of the ways you can actually use to identify and separate them from one another.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions in the class? No one? There's a question.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Nubukanya. My question
Good day
is
to
it good day? Is it ethical to keep them in such small jars, or does it like not affect them negatively? Especially
So
like the
only,
one.
yeah, so I only put them in the jar. Okay, so I only put them in the jar to bring them. They actually live in a very big tank outside. So just to show you guys, because there's no internet outside of the jelly lab, I just brought them to the lab for a few minutes. But generally, when we keep jellyfish, they are kept in these zooplankton chrysals. So they swim in this current. So they actually never touch the bottom of the tank. So they actually don't know that they are in a smallish tank, so to say. So as long as they are drifting in the current, they never touch the sides of the tank. So they never know they're swimming. Also, with what we know about jellies and invertebrates, we know that they don't experience pain, and they don't really have special awareness. Box jellyfish do have special awareness, and this guy can actually see. So the water temperature is correct, the volume of water is correct to keep him at least alive for 48 hours, because this 3 or 4 liters is enough to ship him to another country if I had to ship him. So we have done all of those experiments to determine what is the best volume of water to ship animals in, etc., etc. So just for showing and telling, this is completely fine. It also has a really round surface, so there's nothing jagged hurting the jellyfish itself. So it's completely fine and safe in here. So it's just for show and tell. I promise. I love them. They're my favorite animals. So I won't do anything to damage them.
That was an excellent question. I'm so glad you're not cruel to your beautiful jellies. Any
No,
other
they're the prettiest animals here.
They're all the coolest animals, I agree. One of the coolest animals, coolest. Any other questions? Okay. Krish, can I ask you, it's a tough question, I know, but which is your favorite jelly?
I would have to say it's the Benguela campus jelly. I don't have them right now. We're in the process of growing them for the June holidays, but I can surely try and send you some of the photos and you can show your class. It's my favorite because it was the longest jellyfish to grow, and it was the first jellyfish species that I cracked in the lab, where it took people years and years to figure it out. And we got lots and lots and lots of answers from him that we didn't think of. It's also our largest campus jellyfish. When we put them in a tank, we can only keep 2 or 3 at a time, even though our cylinder is 2.5 meters big and a couple of meters across, just because they start eating each other then. Even though they don't know that they are in a tank, they start eating each other just because they are big and they touch each other. So it's also the most magnificent. Let me see. Let me show you why it's so magnificent.
He loves his work.
Give me 2 minutes. So this is a photo of it. I'm gonna see if I can find a video for you. So it's a completely red jellyfish. I'm gonna find a video for you. Here we go.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
You can see how fluffy they are. So their lips are very fluffy because they have a very high surface area to catch lots of fish eggs on. So you can see how they're swimming in the current. They never touch the bottom or the side of the tank. So they're completely unaware that they are in a tank as well.
Well, I can see why that one is your most favorite one. It's very beautiful. Can I ask you to give your opinion? When I teach and tell my students about the various groups of invertebrates, I always try and stress how important all the various invertebrates are in our ecosystems and to maintain their population. So what is your opinion about your amazing Cnidaria in the ecosystem?
So I have a very, very strong opinion on why jellyfish are important to our environment. I briefly mentioned before that there are indicator species of fisheries collapse because there are lots of oceans where we see fish being overfished and removed and lots of jellyfish starting to appear. They're also crucial for animals, especially in the Arctic. We know that whales, dolphins, and penguins feed on jellyfish in lean months when jellyfish are available, but there are no fish. So without that prey item, those penguins and dolphins and whales would not be able to sustain themselves through the following season when the krill starts appearing. So they're key to that. They're very, very crucially to ocean mixing. There are lots of great papers published on how important jellies are to mixing oceans during bloom seasons. They're also very important for studying their venom. People are using box jellyfish venom, especially in Australia, to find specific ways to stop and start patients' hearts without using defibrillators, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then lastly, as I mentioned, jellies are the key to closing the carbon cycle, especially with overfishing happening in so many areas. As jellyfish catch prey in the top layer of the ocean, they actually return that nutrient and that carbon to the bottom of the ocean to be used in the next season. Whereas generally fish don't tend to do that. Fish are either removed and that carbon is removed, and at a much later stage, that carbon is returned to the ocean. Or as fish move, as they migrate, they take that carbon with them and don't necessarily return it back to their original grounds of where they were feeding. So those are just some of the few ways that jellies are exceptionally important to our environment and to and to linking. They are also voracious predators. And so without jellies, population control of certain copepods like plankton, red plankton blooms and things like that won't actually occur because the jellies aren't there to remove those dinoflagellates from the ocean as a prey item. So yeah, I think they're quite crucial. Even though they're spineless and brainless, and many people don't think that they are charismatic like sharks and dolphins, we actually can pinpoint and definitely know that this is the role a jellyfish plays in the environment. Whereas if I'm being facetious, I can look at a dolphin and I can remove a dolphin from an ecosystem, and a penguin or a seal or something else can definitely fill that niche up if I'm being facetious. Whereas jellies, you remove them, that link or chain is completely broken. And we have got very good examples repeatedly all around the world where that has occurred.
Wow. Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions in this class? Any more comments? Wait. Oh, sorry, there's another question here.
Go ahead, Ivy.
Hi. Sorry.
Hello.
You've indicated that some of the jellyfish do not have eyes. So how do they locate the prey? And also, how do they notice when a predator is nearby?
Okay, so once again, I love reading and I can try and give some name for journals, but people have put tags on jellyfish. So Scyphomedusa in general, they've got a little eye spot called the rhopalium. It basically it's photosensitive, which means it's sensitive to light, and it just tells them whether it is night or day, because some jellies do something we call diurnal migration, where during the day they'll go to the surface and at night they go to the bottom of the ocean, or vice versa. So jellies can definitely tell day and night, and they can also tell the right way up and the right way down. They're also sensitive to shadows and presence around them. If I swim in the ocean, or if I'm working in a tank and I reach towards a jellyfish, they can actually sense there's something coming towards them and they can dive and swim away. Those same receptors people have studied in the wild by putting tags on jellyfish, satellite tags and gyrometers and things like that. And they actually saw that Scyphomedusa, which don't generally have eyes, actually hunt in a very similar way like penguins and dolphins do, very deliberate. So either through smell or through sight or some other sense, jellies actually can swim and follow the same patterns where fish and fish eggs and other zooplankton will drift. And they can actually follow them through a water column. And where they follow them, their prey items is as well. So there's some way jellies are able to sense where their prey is, so they can physically hunt. Box jellies, however, do definitely have eyes. They can distinguish shapes. If you watch a box jellyfish swim through a mangrove forest where there are lots of roots, they will physically dodge objects and dodge roots. If you watch box jellies swim around divers, they'll swim around. And so even outside in the harbor, we can watch box jellyfish hunt. Their tentacles are very long. They can be like 4 or 5 meters long. So they can actually relax those tentacles like a net behind them. Even though it's just 4 tentacles, it's very thin, very translucent. It's like a piece of air floating in the ocean. So prey don't generally see it. They will then swim with the part of their body that the fish can see, and they will relax their tentacles behind them, and they will actually chase the fish into their tentacles, catch them, and then pull them in to eat. So the box jellyfish and true jellyfish, we do know they definitely hunt. We just don't know the exact mechanism how some species do it yet.
All right, thank you. Also, I've seen from some movies, do jellyfish have electric current just like eel when they sting?
So no, they don't have an exact electrical current. They're nematocysts to their stinging cell. Most of the potassium, most of their venom is potassium based. So if you add potassium to a cell, the cytoplasm in the cell actually short circuits when potassium is added. It disrupts the charge flowing through there. And so when a jellyfish stings you, it pumps you with potassium. And so your cells actually short circuit, and that's why it feels like it's actually shocking you. And so something like the lethal injection that we still use in America to kill some prisoners is actually based on jellyfish venom. So animals like a blue bottle jellyfish that swim in the ocean and drift down their tentacles can actually sting a fish and stop the fish from swimming away and tearing off their tentacles, because the potassium will actually stop the fish's heart in a contracted state. There's no way for the prey to disappear. So you feel a shock because the potassium actually makes your cell short circuit.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
We've got another question from one of the students.
Okay.
Hi, sir. I just wanted to find out, what is your opinion on people keeping aesthetically pleasing jellyfish as pets? And do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that if it kind of grows into like a privatized market?
So there are two things that you need to consider. Jellies eat very specialized food. Okay, that's the one thing. And I know in America, they do it really, really well. But your jellyfish are going to definitely die in 9 months' time. So in 9 months' time, you're going to have to buy yourself a new pet moon jellyfish. So every 9 months, you're going to have to fork out money to buy some new pets. And jellies aren't cheap. I think they're selling each jellyfish for about 2,500 Rand, a tiny little jelly. That's about a quarter of the size of the ones they have in that tank right now. So yes, monetary-wise, definitely can be a thing. But we also have a problem with jellyfish and invasiveness. Okay? Jellyfish actually get taken up in ballast water of ships. Ships use water to balance themselves out when they go across the ocean. And sometimes they actually pick up jellyfish and then release them somewhere else. There's a very good example in the Black Sea where an animal called a Nemiopsis, or a walnut jellyfish, was accidentally released into the Black Sea, and they actually ate all of the baby fish. And so when the adult fish died, there were no baby fish to make new adult fish. And so for the longest time, the Black Sea had no fisheries, okay? Until accidentally they introduced the prey, the predator of the Nemiopsis jelly. So you should just be, or people should just be considerate and careful. I know you guys are inland, but lots of people, especially on the coast, when they do have a pet and they get tired of it, they tend to release it into the ocean. That's how animals like lionfish become problems. So jellyfish are really pretty to look at. They're the only tanks at the aquarium where I can physically say kids stand in front of the tank or sit in front of the tank and actually stare and look in awe. So they are very beautiful, but they're just really sucky to look like. I don't have jellyfish at home. I don't take work home. But if you would want, I'm sure you could contact somebody, but there currently isn't anybody. Somebody has tried, but I think they shut them down with permitting just because of how invasive jellyfish are. And like I mentioned to you, moon jellyfish is at least 50 different kinds or more. And so by being able to put, I've got the Aurelia species 17 on a page in order to apply for a permit is going to be extremely hard in South Africa, especially because we've got such rich biodiversity. It's found nowhere else. And once that is impacted, we actually make a very, very bad domino effect that we can't actually reverse again. So it's something to think about hard. But they do sell very cool plastic jellyfish if you do really want to keep them. And I know Monterey Bay also has a very great live stream in 4K. You want to make your HDTV play jellyfish swimming around in the living room.
Thank you.
And you don't have to feed them 8 to 10 times a day. So.
Okay, Krish, we have another student with a question.
Hello.
Hi there.
I just want to know what you said about the potassium influx in the cells. If you get like a potent sting from a jellyfish with the potassium and you get a heart attack, can a defibrillator bring you back to life, or do they have to inject something else to resuscitate you?
So there are two things I want to touch on there. The first thing is a defibrillator doesn't actually make your heart start again. Normally when you use a defibrillator, your heart is beating, but it's beating in an abnormal way, okay? And so because it doesn't have a correct sinus rhythm, your body can't pump blood. So in order to get your body to pump blood correctly, you either do CPR to get the blood at least flowing, and you'll get the defibrillator to shock it so the rhythm can come right. So generally, to get your heart started again, we will use an EpiPen or something like adrenaline to get your heart started again. So if you are allergic to bees, we would suggest that you do not work or play with jellyfish at all, just because some jellies have a higher potassium load in the venom than other species. There are also some species that do not actually use a lot of potassium. They use something completely different. And so when it comes to getting somebody to come back to life again, I would just say if somebody's heart does stop, or if they do get an anaphylactic attack in the lab because of a jellyfish sting, I would use an EpiPen and I would do CPR until the people can come, like the paramedics that know basically what they are doing. For jellyfish stings, however, it's very good to use something like vinegar or very, very hot water. The hot water denatures the shape of the protein. So as warm as you can be, sometimes the hot water, like the 40 or 50 degree water, slight burn is more tolerable than the sting of the jellyfish. And then alabazine was really great. But there's one jellyfish called the nightlight jellyfish or Pelagian noctiluca. That's the one I showed you with the little fish in it. For that jellyfish, we do not use vinegar at all for that sting because that actually makes the sting worse. That's actually a species we know of. It's not really potassium based. So we actually use something like methane riser you use for a braai to slow down the stinging, and they use a flat card to just scrape off. You just use a flat card to just scrape off the cells in this manner versus pressing it down. The more you press, the more cells fire. It's like you're bursting little balloons on your skin. So those are the best first aid help that I can tell you about jellies.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think we're sort of coming to the end of the questions here in Bloemfontein. I don't know if you guys want to handle any other questions of people online.
Thanks, Prof. And thanks to the students. Those were brilliant questions. Thank you very much. Holly Magog, you've had your hand up for a very long time. Now is your time.
We have more time available. Their practical is until 6 o'clock.
I know, I used to do me too, and I gave track as well, so I know they've been doing it for a long time.
It's quite down. There's another hand. Krish, are you able to handle another question from a student?
Sure thing.
We have another one. Sorry, Johan, I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. I see. I'm not sure if Holly is perhaps struggling to connect with us. Please, or if the student can ask a question in the meantime.
Hello, my name is Lucy.
Hi there.
I just wanted to know, this question isn't directly for jellyfish, but if after we finish our degree and we want to come work at Two Oceans, which qualifications do we need to come study jellyfishes or whatever?
So there's actually something called the volunteer program that we do, and they're busy ironing it out because they basically changed the rules of the lockdown. So just check our website. But I think if you at least have an undergraduate degree, you can come in straight. But if you don't have one, you have to do a young biologist course or adult course, just so that you know the basics. So that when you're working with a starfish, you know what a starfish is basically. You don't necessarily have to be a scientist to work at the aquarium. There's very few of us that are actually scientists working here. Most of the people that work here actually volunteered here for a very long time and sacrificed their time, and they actually started being employed in about 2 or 3 years from working here, which isn't a very long time in my mind, especially when I think of how fast or slow our turnover with staff is. But yeah, you can gladly come and volunteer. We also have people that do job shadowing with us a lot if you're not sure of what you want to do. So yeah, we don't only have jellyfish, we've got penguins as well. We've got 2 species of penguins. We've got turtles. We have a turtle rehabilitation center upstairs with a little hospital. If you want to do anything vet related or be a vet nurse, we also have a clinic upstairs. We've got a quarantine where we handle parasites. This is a very, very broad spectrum. Like I always say, you're never going to really open your newspaper one day and see a job that says looking for marine biologists. If you studied corals and you did a lot of water quality, you might could work with the municipality when they're looking for a water quality manager or something like that. So I do something with animal husbandry. I have a very big background in raising animals. Since I was a kid, I've bred everything from birds to fish, you name it. It was my pet. I was just not allowed to have any mice or rats. So I've always wanted to work and grow animals. So even at the aquarium here, there are lots of people that love animals. They even bring their pets to work with them sometimes as well. So just check our website just to find out the criteria. And we have very friendly staff. So you're more than welcome to email them or to message them on Instagram or Facebook, and they can give you the correct information for what's happening from now to the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's another question. Okay.
Hello again. This
Hi
is a
there.
question about the digestion, because you just fed them those baby shrimp and then they went to the top of their heads. So
Yeah.
I'd like to know how long does it, like normally, how long does it take for them to digest the food
So
they
it
eat?
depends on the prey item, and it also depends on the kind of protein. So just like if you eat meat, it's going to take you 24 hours to digest food versus if you eat like something that's plant-based. Jellies, if we feed them, we feed our box jellyfish, we feed them fish every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And normally the fish is digested within 3 or 4 hours. It's completely disintegrated, and we just take out the husk from the tank. The brine shrimp, that normally gets digested in 1 or 2 hours. So we have about 8 to 10 feeds for them during the day just because of that. A, they digest the food very quickly. B, if they're in the wild, they're swimming in food all the time. So we want to make sure we give them the same diet. So we feed our jellies like at least 9 and 11 and 2 o'clock are the main feeds of baby shrimp. And then in between, whether it be a smoothie with prawns and mussels and whatever, or mussel juice or other jellyfish, we feed them in between them. And if you actually look at our jellyfish compared to most other aquariums, our jellyfish look like the physical representation of how they will look in the wild, because we try and follow the same diet and formula that they will have. So it just depends on the prey item. And so in the morning when they get a smoothie, we'll feed them the smoothie at 7. And so we'll give them 2 hours because there's so much protein, and we'll actually feed them only at 9, 9:15 again. So yeah, it just depends on the prey item, but it can take anything from 20 minutes if it's a jellyfish eating another jellyfish, because it just melts it and it absorbs it into itself. Like it can take about 3 or 4 hours, depending if it's actually a physical fish with scales and bones and organs and everything.
Oh, so they do digest every part of what they eat. They don't like expel what they don't eat.
They do expel. So they expel the bones and they expel the scales of the fish. They can't digest the scales of the fish, and they can't digest the bones, and they can't digest the shells of the shrimp. So if something is generally calcium carbonate based, the jellies will eject it and drop it to the bottom of the floor, and we'll either vacuum it out with a siphon pipe or we'll scoop it up with a net a bit later on in the day.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? Questions? Oh, sorry, another one. Now we can't stop them now that they started.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, you spoke, I think, about Malaysian jellyfish that aren't like native to South Africa, and you said that they sort themselves out by sticking to each other.
Yeah.
Do we have a problem with other invasive like jellyfish in our coast, or is that not a problem?
So not that we know of yet. We do know that we share jellyfish species with both Namibia and both Mozambique and maybe other countries, depending on the currents pushing them down. But other countries have invasive jellyfish, like I mentioned, the Nemiopsis, which is the walnut jelly. They also have certain species of battle jellies that become invasive. But what's really key in my mind, if I think about it now, our coastline, is that we've got this jellyfish called the pink meanie, which is a jellyfish that's a top predator that only eats other jellyfish. We also have 3 species of compass jellyfish, which is this kind of shape. And these jellies are jellies that also eat other jellyfish. So seasonally, either these species occur together or they occur separately seasonally. So in my mind, we haven't seen a problem with invasive species yet. Okay, knock on wood, just because at the moment with my deduction, we have top predator species living in the ocean that can hunt everything from jellyfish that eat other jellyfish and jellyfish that don't eat other jellyfish. So you basically have our lions and our leopards and our cheetahs in our ocean waters as top predators able to control populations, just like we have our lions and things on land able to be the top predators and keep that pressure on the ecosystem going. From my deduction, that's not a fact, but that's the only thing I can think of why I haven't seen that issue occur yet. But I'm not saying it can't occur.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, there's another one. Okay, I'm sorry.
Prof, can I ask that we give it another 5-10 minutes, then we wrap up. I see there's a lot of people in the aquarium that's asking for Krish's attention at this stage.
What is a distinguishing characteristic between a male jellyfish and a female jellyfish? And also, you said that they reproduce a large number of offspring. So what is an estimated amount that an individual jellyfish can produce?
Okay, so in the one group of campus jellies, the Benguela campus jellies, I can kind of sometimes see a difference between male and female. The females tend to look like they are fuller and fluffier, whereas the males tend to look much longer tail, but that is not factual. I've only made an observation once or twice, but I haven't made it many more times to actually say that it's definitely a thing. Generally with jellyfish, we have to bring them into the lab. We have to dissect a piece of their gonads, look under the microscope and actually see if there are sperm cell sacs or if there are eggs present within the head of the jellyfish. So jellyfish make lots of things we call planulae. They look at those tic-tac sweets. You can go back to the picture, I'll bring it back to the light for Marit. Also, you guys need to thank Marit. She's like keeping the phone there. She's got strong arms. So this is a little planulae. And jellies make hundreds and thousands of these little guys. They swim around for about 14 to 30 days, and they actually settle to actually form this polyp. There are some species that actually can settle and make a jellyfish directly as well. So there are lots of animals that try and skip the rules. So when it comes to polyps, they can make lots and lots of polyps. Like if I don't clean the tank for at least a day, I will see hundreds of little baby polyps sitting on the window, like tiny. But each polyp itself can make between 70 to 120 baby jellyfish at a time as well. So you can imagine if you have 100 polyps, each of them make 100 babies at a time, and at least 90% of those babies survive. You can at least get swarms of jellies that are in the 100, 200 to 700,000 at a time. So they are really, really good at reproducing and making sure that they survive. And if they are not able to produce this season, you can bet your bottom dollar that they will be back next season when conditions are even better for them. Because in that time period, we've done experiments on jellyfish or polyp growth at warm temperatures and at cold temperatures, and it didn't matter what temperature it was. The warmer it was, it just meant they grew more. So if they don't appear as jellyfish in the water column for that year or that season, it just means these polyps have been cloning themselves for a year or two, and now there's even greater amount of jellyfish that can be available in the column. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Krish, I think that wraps it up from our side.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for listening.
Can I actually ask Holly to ask a question? Holly, I'm unmuting you.
Thank you, Krish. I have a question.
Hi, Holly.
Joyce is sitting next to me, and she wants to know, does the jellyfish at any time require oxygen to breathe or anything to breathe, or the air is not part of its living form?
So what's really great is that jellyfish are made out of mostly water, 95% to 98%, depending on the kind of jellyfish. And so because they're made out of water, they basically breathe through osmosis, okay? So if the oxygen content is high outside, the oxygen content is high inside the tissues of the jellyfish as well, the tissues, so to say. But it also assists the jellyfish because the jellies don't necessarily need to live in very high oxygen levels. That's why during red tides, when oxygen is very low, or in environments where oxygen is very low, animals like jellies and jellyfish can actually live there because they don't actually physically require to breathe. So they can actually live in exclusion zones where fish and other animals can live, but the jellyfish can. And that's why the polyps prefer to live at the bottom of the seafloor or on rocks where it's very anoxic, because there's very little competition for space from other animals that also want to use the surface area. So that's kind of made it their niche. It's a beautiful, beautiful story in Namibia that occurs every single day, every single evening, with an animal called a bearded goby. And so the bearded goby actually lives in that anoxic mud of jellyfish breaking down or dead jellyfish, and it actually eats the dead jellyfish during the day. It doesn't have any oxygen to breathe. And in the nighttime, when all the prey are basically gone, these gobies swim to the surface and actually hide in the jellyfish. And actually then breathe oxygen in order to digest their food. And in the evening, they go from the dead jellyfish, the live jellyfish, back to the dead jellyfish to eat it at the bottom of the sea floor again. So that's a very, very interesting relationship to have. And we also know that same anoxic environment is also polyps occur that give us compass jellyfish.
Thank you very much, Krish. That's very helpful.
You're welcome.
And I've learned a hell of a lot that I didn't know anything about.
That's pretty brilliant.
And if Holly learned a lot, then you know you've taught a lesson. Holly and Joyce, thank you very much for your questions. Really
thank you, everybody.
From Kenya. Everybody, thank you so much for attending today's session. Just over to Prof. Linda for a last word. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Krish. This was really amazing. As an invert adorer myself, I really loved your presentation. Anything to sell any invert is amazing for me. So that was a big plus. I'd like to thank my class. Thank you very much for all the questions and for keeping quiet for so long. That was a big problem for me. Really, thanks a lot. And thank you for this share screen thing. I think it really worked very well. Prof. Liesel for organizing it, Yuan for helping us and getting Krish on very short notice to come and give your presentation. And some of the students have already asked me for your contact details, so I'm going to put it on Blackboard. You might get some very interesting queries. You guys are welcome to ask. And from my side, thanks a lot. This was really amazing. I think the technology held out and it really worked very well. Thank you very much.
And thanks to Marit as well, the camera woman.
Thanks, Krish. Thanks to the students. Thanks for excellent questions. To see any following events coming up in the month ahead, please visit sharescreenafrica.org/events. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again soon.